So, we've talked then about the kinds of personalities that you need if you're in a group. The other big theory that we have in this particular chapter is how do groups get together. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I have done this theory, the theory of Tuckman with other groups, students like this one. It's one of the easiest ones to remember, because the four main stages that Tuckman says that a group goes through, they talk about forming, storming, norming and performing. So it's fairly easy to remember. So, forming is when you initially get together. When your group, when your team initially meets. The storming stage. The storming stage is what's known as competition for leadership. So competition for leadership basically means who is going to be the boss, who's going to be the leader who organises everybody else. We'll come back and talk about that in a second. Norming is where we all agree on what to do. Now let's just talk about those three stages first of all. If you remember, we mentioned a little while ago that you can have formal groups and you can have informal groups. A formal group is one where somebody has decided that it should get together. Somebody's decided that this group, this team is necessary. So a department in an organisation, a committee in an organisation, a group of people who will meet regularly to discuss ideas in an organisation. But somebody's decided it's going to get together. That often will also mean that they will decide who is on this group, who is on this team. So the forming stage, they get together for the first time and they meet. The first time a committee meets. You've set up a new department, you have allocated some office space, you've recruited people maybe from outside or maybe from inside, and they all meet together in the office for the first time. So that's the forming stage. The storming stage, in a formal group, there will be a boss, there will be a manager, the head of department, the chair of the committee. There will be somebody who is designated as the person in charge. But what the competition for leadership there means is often the boss, the manager, listens to some people more than others. So what you want to do is you want the manager, you want the person in charge to listen to you rather than to somebody else. So that's where the competition for leadership comes in a formal group. Norming, we agree on what we're going to do. So this group is going to meet every second Wednesday of the month, and we will have a 3-hour meeting where we'll talk about what we're going to do. This department is going to carry out its tasks in this particular way, so we agree what we're going to do. The performing stage is where we get the tasks done. Now, how long does it take a formal group to get from the first stage down to the last stage? It could be weeks. It could be months. It could even be years. A good example of this would be something like the European Union. The European Union is a group. It's a very, very large group. Every time there are some new countries that are admitted to the European Union, they have to go through a new formation because it's now a fresh group because you've got more people in it. So you now need to get together with more countries in it. There will be storming. Now, the new countries, how important are they going to be? The norming stage, the new countries particularly have to get used to how the other people do something before they can start performing. Now, that could take years. Even if you have got a small company, it can still take time. A very good example of this in real life will be something like when you get two companies who join together. There could be a merger, there could be an acquisition. and you now start mixing the departments together. So you had two separate finance departments, and now you put them together. You go for exactly this process. So there's two finance departments. They now need to meet for the first time as one big finance department forming. Competition for leadership. We had two finance departments. We had two managers. Who's going to be in charge now? The norming. We did something in one way. We did it in a different way. We now need to agree. And it might take a while before you actually get those things done. There have been numerous examples in the past of where companies have tried to come together with mergers, with acquisitions, and it hasn't been successful. And one of the reasons why it hasn't worked is because of all these four stages. Companies often get stuck at those two. They can't work out who the boss is, so they can't really ever agree what they're going to try and do. And then they can't agree how to do it. So it can be a big problem. Now that's all to do with formal groups. Informal groups are just basically groups of your friends. So you decide that you're going to go out for a meal. So you're perhaps going to meet somewhere, then you're going to go on to the restaurant afterwards for your meal. The forming stage, you get together. If it's a group of you who know each other, fine. But there might be people who are coming along for the first time. The storming stage, even if you are a group of friends and you are meeting somewhere and then you're going to go on to a restaurant, somebody has to say, I think it's time that we left. If nobody says that, you never get to the restaurant. So somebody's going to have to say that. Now, often it's fairly obvious who it's going to be. You don't have a vote on it. Just somebody, it's just obvious they are going to be the person who's in charge. The norming stage, agreeing on what we're going to do. You go out with a group of people for a meal. Fine. Do we all pay for our own meal? Do we all basically take the meal and share it out equally? Do we all pay for our own drinks and share the food between all of us? What does your group agree to do? And it's going to be different. I go out for meals with different groups of people, and we do it in different ways depending who I'm with. You all have to agree on it. You have to go through those stages before you get to the performing bit, which is either a formal group gets its tasks done, or an informal group gets to eat. So you've got those four stages. Those four are very, very important. Now, leading on for that, you've got another two stages. These aren't as important, and these were actually added after Tuckman's original theory. So he didn't originally come up with these. Other people have added them on afterwards. The dorming stage is where you get complacent. It means that you've been together as a group for so long that you just automatically do the same thing over and over and over and over again without necessarily thinking about it. If it was a group of people going out for a meal, they've now got to stage they always go to the same restaurant, which of course wouldn't really be particularly interesting. If it's a group of workers, they've now settled down and they just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. If you remember, a little while ago, we talked about what's known as groupthink. Groupthink is where you've got into that. You just do the same thing. Now, that may well mean that you are not generating any ideas. You're not coming up with anything new. So that can often mean that you become less effective. In other words, you're not as good as you used to be, because you just do the same thing over again and nobody can be bothered to think of anything new. So dorming is a bad stage. The other two we've got is what's called morning and adjourning. Morning and adjourning are basically the same thing. The group splits up. The team splits up. The only difference is that morning, it's permanent. The group is never, ever getting together again. So the task that needed doing is done. That team's never getting together again. Adjourning means that they're going to reform at a later date. So they're having a break and then they'll get back together again. So again, working as an auditor, you worked on lots of teams that adjourned. So you did an audit for a company and then you stopped, and then the same time next year, when you went back to the client again, a lot of the people would be the same. Wouldn't be identical, but a lot of them would be the same. So that's a journey. On the other hand, if you work for something which is one-off, once it's finished, that's the end of it. Now again, you need to know those two because, along with the other four, the examiner could say, here are some stages. Which one is the odd one out? Which one is he invented? The examiner could also say, he can't do this with Belbin, but he can do it with Tuckman. The examiner could say, put them in the right order. So he's actually got the right ideas, but he's put them round the wrong way, and you have to put them back into the right order: forming, storming, norming, performing. Alternatively, the examiner could say, here is a group, this is the stage that they have got to. They are all doing this, they are all doing that. Which stage is it? So the examiner says, you've got a group, and, for example, they are perhaps meeting for the first time. So that's obviously the forming stage. They are perhaps agreeing on the procedures that they are going to follow later on. Well, that's the norming stage. So the examiner will tell you what they're doing and say which stage have they got to.